Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the future. I appreciate taking time out from your very, very busy schedules and the many opportunities that you have to hear about what I've been thinking about. I think this began 20 years ago when I understood that a lot of the technology that we're making is a little scary, and I discovered that a very common reaction is to want to be afraid of things and to fear what's coming. And I found that there was a sort of a different take on things, which is that we should really embrace what's coming, because by embracing it, that was really the best way that we could actually steer it. And that's what I want to talk about here, is the ways in which we can embrace some of the things that are coming in order that we could steer them. And so I use the word inevitable in kind of a very soft way, not meaning that if we rewound the tape of history that we would get where we are right now, that we would kind of play a tape and we would arrive back to us twittering every 5 minutes. I mean inevitable in a very different way, the way in which there's been 20 years of momentum, and now there's going to be another 20 years of it going in the same direction. And so I want to try and talk about those large momentums, those trends that are moving through us out into the next 20 years, and to try and see if we can, in some ways, understand what those big trends are. I'm not talking about what's going to be the next Apple, what's the next iPhone. I'm more interested in sort of what those long-term trends are. And I talk about 12 of them in my next book called The Inevitable. But I don't have time, so I think what I wanted to do today was talk about 3 of them. 3 of the big ones that I find very exciting and I think are going to be tremendous forces in the next 20 to 30 years. Some of these won't start off right away being as big as I think they'll be, but that's okay, because I think these are about directions that we're moving, and if you can see where we're moving, I think we'll understand and be able better to embrace what's coming as a way to steer it, as a way to manage it. So the first one, the first trend, the first force that I'm talking about is something actually that's gotten a lot of play here at South by this year, which is AI. Okay, so that should work. There you go. And I use the word cognification rather than say artificial intelligence. I think is a better way to think about it, because we associate so many things with intelligence. There's a lot of baggage. And I'm talking about something that's maybe a little bit more mechanical. Cognification, to cognify things. We have a hint of that in our Siri, which is just a hint. And we've been having hints of it for 20 years, but something happened recently that has sort of propelled this to another level. And that something that happened is technological. As I said, we've had X-rays being examined by AIs as well as doctors could do. We have robo-lawyers going through legal evidence in a way that no human paralegal could do. We have the AI in airline pilots, so the pilots actually wind up steering or navigating the plane for only 7 or 8 minutes out of a flight. The rest of it is done with an AI of sorts. And of course, if you own a modern car, the brakes in your car are a type of intelligence that brake better than you do. That's why they're there. And they're very reliable. We've had examples of Watson beating, Deep Blue beating Kasparov, the chess champ, beating the Jeopardy champ. And Watson itself is now being re-educated as a doctor to try and do diagnosis in a way that is comparable to an average human doctor. What's changed now, those are kind of the past, what's changed now is that we have a convergence, kind of a perfect storm of 3 technological changes that have brought about the new spring AI from the winter of AI where it was moving very, very slowly. Now it's moving very fast because of this convergence of three technological factors. The first is an ancient technology, 50 years old, a way of doing neural nets, a way of imitating the neurology of your brain in a computer with a software algorithm called neural nets. What's different now is that before they could only do them in a small scale, and it turned out that you just need to do it at billions of them rather than, say, thousands or millions. That scale was really important. So we have the processing power to do them in the billions. And then we also learned how to stack them up. This is the deep learning algorithm. Several hierarchies levels so that the results of one neural net were fed up to the next layer of neural nets and so forth. And so they may go 11 deep. And that mathematically was so complex that it took mostly researchers in Canada working during the dark ages of AI, continuing with these researches so they were able to do a neural net working with billions and billions of possibilities. And that turned out to be a very decisive innovation, able to do something that long suspected we could do, but now we could do it. The second one is coming from the gaming community. Most of your computers do things very fast. It may look like they're doing more than one thing at once, but usually they're actually doing things so quickly in a row, in a row, in a row, in a linear fashion, that it looks as if they're multitasking, but in fact, most of the architecture is doing one thing after another very fast. Computer gaming and the video required processing in parallel. Parallel computers have been used for a long time trying to do AI, but they were millions and millions of dollars. What happened with the gaming community is that they made these chips that could do parallel processing necessary for games so cheap that they became a commodity. And suddenly the AI researchers discovered that they could actually run an artificial intelligence on gaming chips because they were so cheap. They didn't need millions of dollars. And then the third ingredient that was missing before was having huge treasures of data, not just to train these AIs, not just a few thousand pictures, but millions of images, millions of instances that you could use to train. And that, again, turned to be a very decisive factor. So these three things are new. They're new within the last 5 to 10 years. They came together, and suddenly, that's why we're seeing all this activity and action and results in AI. So what do we get from that? Is we got something that's going on right now, which is you have an AI that has just beat 4 out of 5 games the world's Go champion. Go was considered until last week as something that wouldn't probably be cracked by AI for another 10 years. And already we're seeing that it's making novel and surprising moves. And the Go players look at it and say, that is a brilliant creative move. That's just Go. It's a very narrow task. The Go algorithm cannot play chess right now. It can't play checkers. And so it's narrow. And I want to emphasize that that is the kind of AI that we're going to get. But that's very useful. Google's AI can identify what's going on in a picture. And if you haven't done it, try uploading all your photographs to the Google photo place, and you can apply their AI, and you can extract out from your own pictures whatever you want. You can type in, show me all the pictures from that birthday party where the guy was wearing the pirate hat. Maybe things not quite that complex, but you can search through your photos that haven't been tagged, and it actually sees and perceives what's inside the photograph and can label them. There's another AI that was just recently published, and this was an AI that would look at a photograph and you could query it. You could ask the AI about that photo and say, is the person wearing a hat? What color is the ball? What is that person doing? And it would in English or in language, and it would respond to you, understand your question, and understand your question in respect to what the image was presented. Again, it's not as smart as a 4-year-old, but it's very smart in that one direction. And then Google taught an AI to learn how to play video games. Not how to play video games, which had already been done, but to learn how to play, which is fundamentally different and profound. The idea is that it just showed it games, and it would watch the games, and it would get points for winning, and that's all that it did. And so it figured out how to play the game. And then it would go on and try to figure out and play another game. And within hours, it would be able to beat most humans. Very narrow, but useful. So what I like to think about this is artificial smartness. So take away the idea of intelligence and talk about artificial smartness. That may not freak us out as much. That's a little bit more practical and useful. And so your calculator has a type of artificial smartness. It's much smarter than you in arithmetic. That doesn't really scare you. It shouldn't, because it's very useful. We have navigation systems now, and more of those are being, behind the scenes will be a type of AI that will be a super navigator. And that's really what it's good at. Maybe nothing more than that, but it will be really, really smart. And, of course, even search. Google, the reason why, Google has these algorithms, and more of the AI is being applied to when you search for something. So it understands what you're asking for, and it can distinguish between the things that are similar, and that kind of intelligence is just buried in there. It's practical, useful, and you won't ever see it. It is nothing like her, or AI as we normally think of it. It's just artificial smartness. Now, the thing about this is that the mechanics of this, it's not exciting. You're not going to fall in love with Google search. It's boring in an industrial sense. And what we're moving to is an AI that becomes like web hosting. It's a utility. It's a utility that is served, and it's not human-like. So the advantage of the AI that's being built into like the self-driving cars, their virtue is that they are not like human intelligence. They aren't distracted. They aren't thinking about whether they should have gone to med school. They aren't having an argument with the guy in the garage. They are driving, and that's their virtue. In fact, I think eventually we will sell AIs as being free of consciousness because they aren't being distracted. We want them to be very mechanical, but very, very smart in that way. And what we're going to do, again, is not try to make intelligences that are like humans. I think we'll get over that impulse, but to make intelligences that are unlike us as possible, but smarter in these different dimensions. So imagine taking a possibility space of possible ways of thinking, of possible minds, and actually trying to discover or invent those as many different types of, or species of thinking, if you want to think of that way, as possible. Because I think there are going to be many problems that we have, including problems in science, say dark matter, or gravitational waves, quantum energy as relates to the other forces, that may be so difficult that we might require other kinds of minds to help us solve it. And what we're doing with AI is really making all these kinds of minds. And some of them will be very small, like a calculator, very, very specific, like the navigator. But we're in the process, in this beautiful Cambrian explosion opportunity, to populate the world with as many different types of thinking as possible. Think different. That is the value of AI. It's not that it's smarter than human, it's the fact that it can be very, very intelligent and think differently than humans. The other thing about AI is that by and large, it's going to become a service. It's going to be generated in a generating plant far away from you and sent over the wires to wherever you want it, just like electricity. So 100 years ago, there was a lot of people who got very excited by electricity, and many businesses started where they would take X something, a pump, a washing machine, a mixer, and they would electrify it. And there was a great business made in electrifying, and none of them were making the electricity. They were just getting the electricity off the grid, and they were electrifying their businesses. And the electricity flowed from the grid, from a source. It was a utility, a commodity. That's going to happen with AI very soon. You won't have to make your AI. You will purchase it, as much IQ as you want, and it will flow in the same direction that electricity flows from the grid into wherever you want it. And so it becomes something like a commodity. And I would suggest then that the formula for the next 10,000 startups could be take X, add AI. Take something you like, and say, instead of electrifying it, we're going to cognify it. We're going to add AI to it into the back. It's not really visible, but we're going to do something with the AI that we can just purchase. And in fact, AI will become so much of a commodity that I think maybe a better way to think about it is to say, take AI and add X, in the sense that it's having AI is not going to be very special. It's what you do with it. It's the interface to it. It's all the things that you do around it. So these two things of AI is a commodity available anywhere, what's the unique interface to it, or what can you do, what can you add it to that it hasn't been added to before in a way that hasn't been added before. And this AI, again, is not a conscious intelligence, human-like. It's smartness. It's synthetic learning. It's synthetic smartness. It's smartness that you can scale up. That is the power that is going, and that's very, very powerful. The other thing about it is that the more people that use an AI, the smarter it gets. Okay, the more people that use it, that's what they call it network effects. The more people that use an AI, the smarter it gets. The more people use it. The more people use it, the smarter it gets. Okay? That means that it's very likely that there'll be network effects in AI, meaning that there's probably going to be a few very big companies that serve the majority of general purpose AI. Lots of companies selling specialized versions, but the big cloud versions are going to be predominantly a utility. And the other thing about AI is that AI also accelerates its own improvement, in the sense of the more AI there is, they'll be actually used in developing new AI. So there's also the network effects going on in there. So this is why this is going to move very fast. Where we are right now is AI is good enough to improve fast. And so after a very long period, I think we're going to see very fast advances. As more people use it, it'll get smarter. So as we put them into AIs into bodies, we call them robots. And while there's some very interesting and fun dynamic of the Boston dynamics, where you have robots that can do things, very humanoid, those, I believe, are still very, very far off. There's so many challenges that I don't think that's really where we're going to see AI play out in the time frame that I'm talking about. Yes, eventually, but not in the next couple of decades. There's still many, many factors. But these kind of robots that are industrial helpers, that aren't trying to be mobile in the way the human is, are happening already. And the power that they have is that you don't need to be a programmer to programming. They will watch what you're doing. They will learn from trial and error. And you are able to work next to them. That's called a Baxter. And this is the Tesla factory. That's what industrial robots normally look like. They're caged. You can't get anywhere near them because they could kill you. They don't have any idea that you're around. And they take PhDs basically to program. But with the coming of AI, we can actually have robots that we talk to and that you show what you want done. And then they will watch what you're doing and remember it. And you can work next to them on an assembly line like another colleague. And in fact, as we think about, and by the way, and they also are able to learn by trial and error. So they can keep doing things until they get it right, and you don't actually have to teach them. You can just, again, give them a reward system. That's happening now. I wanted to suggest that one of the worries about robots that you hear a lot, and it's a legitimate worry, but I think is overstated, which is that robots are going to take our jobs. Yes, they're going to take our jobs. They're going to take a lot of our jobs. Any job that can be specified in terms of productivity will be a job that go to robots. Productivity is for robots. I believe that a lot of jobs that we're kind of currently fighting over are actually jobs that we'll be ashamed that humans even did. They're basically jobs that humans shouldn't be doing, that because robots can do them as well or better. And if they're measuring by the productivity measurement, then there are definitely jobs that should go to robots. Humans, the kind of jobs that we're headed towards are jobs that are going to be made by automation and new technology. 200 years ago, there were 70% of the Americans were farmers. And if you had come to them and said, you know, your grandchildren, there'll only be 1% of, even 150 years ago, even 100 years ago, there'd only be 1% of the people in this country would be farming. They would ask you, well, what could we possibly do if we weren't farming? And you would say, well, you could be a ballerina, mathematicians, web designers, tax accountants. There'd be all these things that would make no sense to them at all, because most of those, or many of those new jobs were created by the new technologies that we made. And the jobs that we're headed to are also going to be created by the fact that we have robots and AIs to help us make these new jobs, to invent the new technologies, to work with them. And I think working alongside of the robots and the AIs is going to be much more likely than being displaced by them. There's a certain, as a Go and the chess champions discovered, AI think different. And learning how to work with AIs is going to be the new skill. And you are probably in the future going to be hiring people based on how well they work with AIs, how well they work with smart devices, how well they work with automation processes that are very, very smart, because that will be a new skill, and that will be the skill that you want to have. So as we move into this era where a lot of the jobs that we have are going to be replaced by automation, by AI, by robots in the general sense of the word, we want to have jobs where productivity is not important. And that turns out to be the kind of jobs that we want to do. If you are creative, you can't measure that, and that's not productive. If you're being creative, that's not productive because you have to make a lot of mistakes. Science is not very efficient because it has so many failures. Innovation is a highly inefficient process. Picasso was terribly inefficient. Any kind of art is inefficient. Lots of the things that we do socially, like healthcare, nursing, these are all inefficient processes because they really revolve around experience and relationships, and they're not about efficiency. And so we let efficiency go to the robots and the automation and the AIs, and we'll take all the things that are inefficient, creative, that are based around experiences and relationships, which are inherently not efficient and not productive in that sense. And so that's, I think, where we're going to go to. And I think it's a very, very big opportunity space, huge, many, many new kinds of occupations that we'll pay for. And when we get all these other robots make things cheaper and cheaper, what we want to pay for are the experiences, are the relationships, are those things that aren't just being cranked out by robots. And so there will be an economy and an occupation for people who specialize in the inefficient, non-productive aspects of our life. So that's AI. That's why I think it's a big deal. And it's coming, and I think we should embrace it and try to work with it. The second big trend, the thing I'm most excited by, is I spent the last couple of months looking at virtual reality. But that's not how it began, because that's me on the right in 1989 trying out virtual reality at General Lanier's VPL. And so what I saw then with the glove and the goggles was amazing. I thought, this is going to change everything in 5 years. I was so wrong. I was so wrong. The VR that we have today is not 1,000 times better than what I saw then. It's better, definitely better. but it's 1,000,000 times cheaper, and that's the thing that happened. In today's dollar, if you try if we had to recreate the kind of quality of VR that we have today, it would have been $1,000,000 back then. That's Jaron's calculation. So what happened was, while the VR got, it got better, it just got vastly cheaper. And how did that happen? That happened because of phones. Phone technology happens to have 3 of the technologies at commodity prices that enabled VR to happen now cheaply. And those were the screens. A lot of the low-end VR goggles actually just use your phone. So we had really cheap high-res screens made at commodity prices. And then there was the tracking, location, gyroscope, accelerometers that were built into the phones that you could actually use for head tracking. They were dirt cheap all of a sudden because of the commodity scale they were being produced. And then the third one was the processors. Again, becoming cheap enough to be put into the phone, basically a supercomputer in a phone. So those 3 things have driven the technology to the price point where now we can have a $1,000,000 VR setup available for $1,000, basically. And so it will go even cheaper, and it probably needs to go cheaper before it becomes mass market. But that's why we're going to make these things probably into a platform I think will be as big and robust and wide and interesting as smartphones have been. So the one thing I concluded after spending several months trying all these things out is that this time I really feel that it's real. It's here to stay and will beyond. As one guy said, they're now going to be in Best Buys and they'll never leave the shelves of the consumers from now on. They're here to stay. That's Mark Zuckerberg walking down a crowd of people all with the Oculus on. And just to go very briefly through, there's, for your education, 2 general kinds of VR. One is the immersive, the virtual reality, where you're completely surrounded by the visuals. You're in a different place. And I have to say, that sense of presence, of being there, is real. You do, in your body, somewhere behind your frontal cortex, you feel like you're there. And the second one is the MR, the mixed reality or AR, augmented reality, where you wear some glasses that are transparent and you can see the room, and there's something else, a layer of something virtually present. And that presence is also very, very real. So you have the Magic Leap and the Meta and the HoloLens of the mixed reality giving you presence, and you have the Oculus and the Vive and others that give you that immersion. The second, and the mixed reality, by the way, is where I think the highest graphics are right now, in the sense of you actually can't see the pixels. You can walk around, and so that presence is absolutely real, even if the object being presented is not real, is a cartoon, or may not look real. But even though it doesn't look real, it actually feels that it's really present. So the presence is real, even though there's maybe a fictitious or fantasy object. So the vision for mixed reality is many different use cases that are imagining. And I think a major one is actually going to be in the office. So you have one screen on your glasses to replace all the screens. Instead of having lots of screens, you can have all those virtual screens in your eyes. You can really do work. They're really high res. I watched a movie, high definition movie, inside one looking out onto the virtual screen. You can move around. So that does work. The second distinction in these is between the low end and the high end. The low end, you have only a swivel. This is the cardboard and the gear, where you basically are just tracking your head up and down and around. And that's the low end. The higher end is where they have room scale tracking, where you can get off your stool and roam around and get behind things and see get down and high, and that sense of having more of an immersive experience. So most of these are in the VR, but even the mixed reality does both of those. Most of them are the roaming room scale. So those are the general categories. And from that, what I'm suggesting, what we get out of that, is that we move from this world where we had an internet of information, this marvelous moment when anybody in the world could access any information in the world, where you had the Wikipedia available to any in the world in almost any language. Anything you wanted to find out, you could find it. You could ask questions. So we had this amazing, I still think unappreciated marvel of a magnificent machine that would allow us to give information to anybody, anywhere. And I think we're going to move from that internet of information to the internet of experiences. And that the experiences will become the currency and the unit of what we are getting when we log on. And one of the major experiences is conversation. So I think the internet, in some ways, if we think about it in 20 years from now, we won't think about it as a place, cyberspace, but we'll think about it as a conversation, as something that we interact with, that we have an experience of, that we are dialoguing with, rather than a place that we go to. This internet of experiences that's going to be kind of funded by all these different types of gear where we can share experiences, create experiences, sell experiences, trade experiences, talk about the experiences. That's, I think, where we're headed to. One of the interesting surprises to me was in looking at the kinds of, when you go to a video game, say that has a first-person view, like a shooter game, like a Call of Duty, or even a Minecraft, that when you put it into a VR and you have this experience, it shifts your point of view. It's like you say, well, how could you shift your point of view? You're already first person. And I think what happens is that it moves you to what I would call a you person. The thing about the shooter game is that you are still kind of watching it. You're kind of watching it from the first person view, but you are watching it. When you get into VR, you're not watching it anymore. It's happening to you. And one of the common descriptions of people who leave that is they say that they're not remembering the experience as something that they watch. They're remembering it as something that happened to them. So that shift is really very, very strong. And one thing we have noticed is that a lot of the kind of maybe gruesome or gory things that happen in a first-person viewpoint become too strong once you're in that you person. And part of the reason why people may not spend as much time is that it's kind of exhausting because you are there, it's you. You get tired faster, you get saturated maybe is a better way to say it, faster. So that shift is important because I think that works on us at a different level. And as I'll mention in a couple more slides, it's the fact that it's not happening in your head, it's happening somewhere much deeper. And that's part of the trick that we're developing to actually move it so that it resides in a deeper place. One of the things that they know about VR is that tracking your movements around is much more difficult technical problem, than just making really nice reality-based pictures. So your body movement, moving your whole body, tracking your whole body, and fooling your whole body is the real challenge, not just making pictures. Because it turns out that what you see, even if it's 3D, high-res, indistinguishable from reality, is really basically only 50% of that feeling of being there. That the tactile, the hands, and everything else that you feel is at least 50% of your sense of your experience. So there's a new company called Void, and they take you wear helmets and gloves and a vest and a suit, basically, and you go through in a very untethered way, and you have a completely other place experience. You were there, no doubt about it. And that's because they are using all those other aspects of your body, including smell, skin, temperature, and things like that. They actually employ something really cool, which I just want to mention very briefly, which is this idea that they can make kind of an infinite room inside a fixed little tiny room because they're doing something called redirected walking, which means that when you move 90 degrees, they will only show you moving 80 degrees in your visor, so that they're cheating you 10 degrees, and they can stack that up so you're walking in circles, but you think you're walking straight line for miles. Okay? They can do redirected touch, where you're grabbing different things, but actually you're grabbing the same thing again and again. You think you're grabbing different bottles, but you're grabbing the same bottle with the same device. And they can have stairs that kind of keep collapsing under you, so you think you're walking up forever, but you're just walking in place. And the idea here is, the guys behind us were stage magicians and theme park people. The idea is that we're finding out through VR how to kind of do the kind of trick that cinema does with us in our eyes. If you see a movie, even if this is a movie of a cartoon character like Mickey Mouse, if you see Mickey Mouse throwing a ball, now we would say, okay, Mickey Mouse isn't real, but the ball really did move across the screen. It really did move. But it didn't, because there's nothing moved. It was just a series of still images one after the other. There was no movement in the images. That all happened in your brain. And the same kind of a thing here, this sense of presence is happening. You're assembling this. You're being tricked in the same way that the cinema tricks you into thinking there's motion. And we're discovering what all these things are to trick us to really believe that we really are there, this really did happen. And that ability to do this is part of what makes these experiences so powerful. And so we're just at the beginning of discovering what those are. That's a Microsoft demo, TED, of telepresence, a 3D moving character that you look at that you really feel is there. And there was actually a demo here at South by 8i, which is showing how to capture 3D in a resolution where you can come up to the person talking and you can see the fabric on their clothes. And I even found it uncomfortable to get so close to these virtual people, like I was invading their space. That's the degree of realism that we can do right now. And you add it to things like ways to read your face without having to wear markers, and you can actually have a telepresence of someone else who works in Bangalore, and they're going to be sitting next to you with your glasses on, and you really will feel like they were there. And the secret, by the way, is eye contact. And once you bring that into these worlds, and the person is looking at you while you're speaking, you are utterly convinced that there's somebody there, even if they don't look exactly like your friend, but they're close enough. So I'm predicting that VR will become the most social of all the social media, because from the void to the very first VR experience that I had with Jaren, there was other people involved, and other people are far more interested in these worlds than other objects or landscapes. It is inherently a social event, a social experience. And I think that there's kind of a Metcalfe's law which says that the value of a network increases by the square of the nodes of the members, and I think that's going to absolutely be true in VR, that the value of the experience will increase by the square of the number of the people involved. And so this is going to be, I think, inherently something that we share, because experiences, I think, are even more than information, are something that gain by being shared. And when we make these things, we're going to have experiences that have people in them, and having those people in them will make them more valuable. And so the first things we'll be doing is trying to figure out how to have more people in them at the same time. This is High Fidelity, which is the guy who started Second Life, is now doing a VR world. And Second Life is still going, and people don't realize that. There's almost 1 million members still paying to use these very rudimentary avatars, but here's avatars that will actually, you don't have to, you just move your own body, their bodies move. As you move around, your avatar moves around, and more importantly, they look at you when they're talking to you. And you really feel as if, because they're speaking to you, there's people there. And that's the future of the VR platform, which is social. So let me just talk about the last of the 3 things I want to talk about. And that is, I think, in this inevitable movement, one of the things that's coming that I think we aren't going to be able to stop and that we have to engage with is tracking. So one of the things we have demand right now is we want things to happen in real time, and for things to happen in real time, we have to track stuff. We also feel that we are unique like everybody else, and so we want things personalized to us. That requires tracking who we are, what we do, what we like. Those two things, again, are just increasing our impetus to have tracking technology. And I'm going to suggest that anything that can be tracked will be tracked. I don't see any force at work in the world today that would suggest that in 50 years from now or 100 years from now, there would be less tracking. We have self-tracking, quantified self, something I began 8 years ago. We have tracking each other with phones, tagging each other. We have voluntary checking into this or that. We have Uber tracking us. Then we have the government's tracking. All this is going to increase. And it's going to increase, by the way, the virtual reality worlds. I mean, if a smartphone is a surveillance device that we buy and put it onto our pocket, then VR is a surveillance state that we're going to voluntarily get into because everything in that world is being tracked. Every motion, all your micro expressions, your entire behavior is being tracked in VR. So that's just make that clear. And with the quantified self of tracking of everything, medical-wise, this is a Scanadu tricorder prototype, which you just touch against your skin, and it gives you EKG and about 20 other different vitals, medical vitals, and they'll even be able to tell things like glucose, sugar counts very, very soon using spectra, the color of the blood. That's happening at a scale that we can keep track of all the time in many, many ways, and maybe even over a whole life, the life loggers, where you keep a record of it, which is really a good thing. I think that's good because one of the things we get out of that by tracking everything all the time is that we realize that my normal is not your normal is not your normal. We actually, when we get sick or when we need to do something, we need to have a baseline. We need to know who we are. We need to know how our own bodies actually work, and we don't right now. Averages don't exist. They're really not very good in medicine. What you really want to know is what your body's been doing and how it works. And so we can actually, what you actually want is a pill or therapy or medicine or health regime that's tailored exactly to you and your body. That requires tracking. And there's personalized medicine is sort of the goal. There's actually a guy who's doing a startup where you make he has a pill maker, and it takes whatever supplements or drugs you're taking, and it puts it into a single pill that you take, and then your quantified self measurements track what happens during the day, and it readjusts the dosages for the next day. So you have a different dosage pill based on what happened to your body the day before. So every day you have a personalized medicine. That's what tracking can do. That's the good side. Of course, we're being tracked everywhere all the time for many other reasons. As I said, even our friends are tracking us. And I would suggest that anything that can be measured will be measured. And that might suggest a kind of a future that we don't want. And I think part of the reason why it seems kind of scary right now is because they are measuring things, or they know things about me, and I don't know anything about them. And what I'm suggesting is in that kind of dystopian world of Minority Report, where Tom Cruise is kind of dashing as a renegade through the corridors and the ads are following him, they're personalized just to him. That kind of a world, I think, is not, I think the tracking is not going to go away. I think we can't stop it, but I think we can civilize it. I think we can actually make it more civil, more domesticated, more comfortable by having covalence. By covalence, I mean that I would like to have a symmetry so that I know who's tracking me, and I can track them. I know what they know about me. I can correct it. I can hold them accountable, and I get direct benefit. That's not true right now. They know about me. I don't know who they are. I don't have any recourse to correct it. I don't get any direct benefits from it, and it could be completely wrong. And so if we can introduce a kind of a covalence, a symmetry to it, I think it becomes a little bit more tolerable. And the other thing about that is that I think there's a kind of a binding between two different sets of characteristics. There's the scale of very, very private and very, very transparent, which happens to be completely correlated to the generic and personalized. So if I want to be treated as an individual, if I want people to treat me as an individual, to personalize like a friend, I have to be open and transparent to them. That's the only way I can be treated as an individual as who I am. I have to be transparent. If I choose to be private and hide myself and my preferences or anything that I know about me, then I'm going to be treated generically. I think we should have that slider and some choice in that. But here is the surprise, is that when we have that choice, most people are pushing the slider to the personalized and transparent. And I sum that up as saying that vanity trumps privacy. That's been a surprise. Who knew? But I think that's where we're going. I do think we should have that slider to control, but the surprise is that most of us are pushing it in that direction. Anything that can be tracked will be tracked. So those are the three things that I think are coming. There's 12 that I talk about in my book, that the inevitable, that I think are kind of forming where we're going to. But I would have to say one thing, even though I've thought a lot about what those 12 are, and there of course are probably more, I know a couple things about the future where we're going to go in reality. And one is that it's really difficult to believe. I know that because we were talking about things like Wikipedia or user-generated content long, long ago, and people found it very, very hard to believe that that was possible. Or eBay, for that matter. I'm going to buy a car from a stranger? That seems impossible. But one thing I've learned in these 20 years is really to believe in the impossible more often. For instance, I have a friend, I remember at the beginning of Computerdom, he was saying, you know, someday computers would be so cheap, you'd put them into doors. And everybody laughed. That was stupid. Why would you want a computer in a door? Well, you can't go to the hotel unless you put in any hotel, and there's a computer in the door that you have to put your card into. That was an impossible thing that we've learned to believe. So I think we have to believe in the possible more often. And a lot of these impossible things actually are tied to the fact that we're doing things at a scale of collaboration that have never been done before. That social element of actually collaborating at a scale of thousands or millions or billions of people. And that's where most of these impossible things come from. But nonetheless, I think we have to open our mind to believe the impossible more often. And the second thing I would say about that is that we are just at the beginning of the beginning. In 20 years from now, we'll look back and say, you never had the internet in 2016. It didn't even exist. You thought you had it, but hadn't even really happened yet. Most of what's happened isn't really the important thing. And again, if you were to go 20 years into the future and look back and say 2036, and if you were to travel there and look at what the most important inventions in 2036, you would realize that we haven't invented them yet. They're not the things. They're not AI. They're not VR. They're things that have not even been invented yet. And that means that you have to invent them. That means that you're not late. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We do have time for some questions that we crowdsource in the audience with the hashtag Ask Kevin Kelly. So let's begin with the first one.
Sure, one question.
Yeah.
Just to let people know that at 6 o'clock, I'm going to be signing books, not the Inevitable book, but my book before this, because the Inevitable is not out yet. So at the bookstore somewhere down there, I will be signing books at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Great. Okay, shouldn't we make AI a public service rather than a commercial commodity to guarantee equal access to it?
Right, so I think that would be a tremendously fabulous idea, is to have an open source, commons, non-commercial version of AI available. And I think that is doable. I just don't know whether or not that would be feasible to create it, because there's so many dead-end wrong paths that we have to take to get there. And government projects are not very good with failure. Okay? So they can't really tolerate failure. So I think we might have to make it commercially first, and then once we know how to do it, then we can try and do a public version of it.
AI will supplement any routine tasks. How long, if ever, before labor markets recover?
I don't think they're going to need recovering. I think the idea that you have an economy built around human labor in terms of as manual labor or labor that is routine is just the first step in the evolution of our economy. I think it's a much higher order and a much more powerful economy to have an economy built around ideas and creativity rather than on routine. Obviously, routine has to be a part of whatever you do, but that's what we want the machines for. So we have a mechanical aspect doing the routine, and we move the economy, which will be much more wealth generating for all those involved if it is based on creativity and ideas.
This is from Jason. Fast forward to the year 2030. What does the future of warfare look like?
So if I'm worried about anything, it's about the weaponization of AI, the weaponization of robots. There's never been any technology that we have invented that we haven't been able to weaponize. So we can't stop that. That will happen. But I think we try to keep it to a minimum. So the future of warfare, I think, is going to look like robot soldiers killing other robot soldiers. That would be sort of like the best case scenario in some cases. But I think the fear would be where we have really robot soldiers killing humans. I think that would be a travesty. And I think not just the robot killing people, but I think cyber war is something that we haven't really addressed. It's not front of mind. I think as humans, we don't have any consensus on what is appropriate in the cyber world in terms of cyber conflict. Is it appropriate for any state or any group to take down a power grid? Is that the equivalent of a chemical warfare? Something we just sort of like say that's a crime against humanity? Or is that permissible? We don't, and if that is not, then what is? And we don't have any consensus about what should be allowed, what should be tolerated in terms of as a civilization, as a country, and what should not be. And I think we really need to have people address that, because that's coming very, very quickly.
Do you see the dystopian AI singularity taking place?
Right.
When will it happen, and will it be as scary as people claim?
So, actually, I attended a couple panels today on that. I'm not a believer in the strong version of the singularity. The strong version says that we make an AI, as I've been talking about, and that eventually that AI is sort of human-like and smart enough to invent an AI smarter than itself, and that smarter AI makes AI smarter than itself, and that each time it does that, it happens faster. And so eventually this thing, which is compounding, becomes infinitely smart, and the first thing it does is it figures out how we can live forever. And that if you just take 250 pills a day today and live long enough to the moment when that happens, then you'll live forever. I don't believe that. And I do think that we are making a version of a singularity that we can't see beyond by connecting all our computers together, all our phones together, 7 billion people together, that we're actually making a kind of a superorganism that may have thoughts that we are not aware of. That's a kind of a singularity that I think is much more possible. And because we are being part of it, because it includes 7 billion people, I don't think it's necessarily going to take over. I think we are going to be it.
Can we hear the 9 other tech trends, please? Too excited to wait for the book.
No. That's good try, good try. And it's only because of time. I really, it's only because of time.
Well, please help me in thanking Kevin for taking time out of his day today.
Sure.